Okay, we are going live. Hello, everyone. So, welcome back to the next panel discussion. So, I have a panel comprising of very, very experienced speakers, and so glad. Let me introduce you the panel. We have Stephen Smith. He's senior director at Encoded Therapeutics, responsible for program management, lead program strategy development and execution, dedicated to bringing new drugs to patients. We have also Eric Towler, whom you had the opportunity to see him in action in a couple of presentations just before. So Eric is director of late oncology project management and global portfolio and project management at AstraZeneca. And we also have Kyle. Let me present you Kyle. So Kyle Willis is a senior consultant. He is an accomplished executive with 23 years of experience in project portfolio management for medical devices, drug device combination projects, and materials for drug delivery, controlled release applications. Kyle has deep experience developing products from concept through commercial launch in multiple therapeutic areas. So, welcome. And the topic we will discuss is how to leverage the project management office, PMO, to best enable project and portfolio delivery. So, I mean, we are really in the core of the PPM topic. And I'm so glad to have all of you respond to these questions. So I have a few prepared questions, but for audience members, I know you have a lot of questions because this is like a really hot topic. So please post your questions in the chat, and I'll include your questions as well to this panel. So my first question for you is, how do you choose or select the structure of program teams and select the right individuals as team managers? Stefan?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank the organizers for the event for including me. So I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. So I bring the perspective of a startup. I'm currently at a gene therapy company. It's my second gene therapy company, and joined at an early enough stage where the PMO is being established and is developing as the program is moving ahead. And how we select the program teams and the structure really depends on who we have on board at the time. Having a very flat organization for a startup, you often have your C-suite folks who are part of your project team. So it becomes a very interesting way of managing. If you have a single program, how do you ensure that you've got communication up and down the organization when it's relatively flat? And how do you create a structure that allows for your leadership to be communicating, perhaps your core team to be communicating, and then your functional folks to be communicating? And, there's no right answer to things. It depends on the personalities. And one of the challenges I have is usually with startups, you have this entrepreneurial spirit, right? All of your leadership is there. They want to be in the weeds. They want to be strategic. They also want to be very execution. So finding a way of bifurcating these kinds of roles and future-proofing your teams is always something that I'm aware of, and have to constantly modulate team structures to accommodate movement forward.
Great, thank you. And Kyle, if you would like to continue on that.
Yeah, certainly. So I bring the perspective of medical device companies, and generally I'd say mid-size. So companies in the range of 300 to 400 people, but with project teams that are in the dozen to 2 dozen, and made up primarily of multifunctional personnel. And this is really one of the difficulties, right? When there are limited numbers of people within each discipline or functional area, and each one is kind of vying for the best talent in each of those areas. So a little bit like Stephen said, where it's based on who's available at the time, unfortunately, it's been the rare occurrence where we've been able to go out and acquire new personnel for any particular project. So really, it's a balance of figuring out what priority that project has within the portfolio, and we really try to minimize the amount of project jumping. Right. So if we have people assigned to a particular project or several, we try not to pull them off of those. And so I'm sure it's a common experience where we kind of go with the teams that we have. But we do try to target people with certain background experience. Otherwise, we choose not to take the project on at that time. So that's one of the key elements there is, do we actually have time and availability and the right people to slot this project in, or is this one that needs to get pushed off until we have actually the right team available?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Eric, if you would like to continue your ideas on this.
Sure. So I have both the experience of Stephen, having worked for virtual companies and small biotechs, and also blue chip pharmas. So I definitely can appreciate the reality of working with the very small companies, that the people that you choose on your team are the people that happen to be there in the company at the time. So that's the way it goes, and you end up with the C-suite people sometimes being, the chief operation officer could be the project manager for a particular team. That's the way it works. I will say that one of the, I thought, most rigorous approaches I've ever seen was a company I worked for, which was sort of medium size, very successful company, but medium size. But one of the most rigorous approaches was they had two things. First of all, any team, they had a formal web-based training for the project management, drug development process. And it was as good as those kind of things can get, with built-in questionnaires throughout the training, and you could not be on a team theoretically until you pass that test. I know some CROs have something like that for therapeutic area training. They also institute those kind of things. That actually was helpful, I think, in a lot of ways, in that you could always fall back on that. Let's say someone got on the team who didn't take the test, or because of shortage or whatever, that you can emphasize as either the team leader or the project manager, whichever role you're playing, that look, you're supposed to take this, you're supposed to know this. This is a core requirement. It's not something we made up. The other thing that actually, as it turned out, from that same company, which was very much a global company, they were very deliberate in that the people that went on, there was a small group of sort of mid-level folks that they were involved in any selection of a new member, and it was extremely well thought out, and so and such that if the project leader was from Asia Pacific, then the project manager would be from the West, and vice versa. And they purposely made that up. And also, if there was a fairly experienced project team in general, that was a good place to put a fairly green, like say CMC person, because the rest of the team probably knew what they were supposed to do and could help them along from a team perspective, even if they weren't sure themselves. So I thought some version of that, whether deliberate and explicit or non-explicit, seems the best working team. The other thing I'll say, because I think what you said, Kyle, resonates with me very well about the trying to avoid the constant flux of people in and off the teams. I mean, it's very disruptive, no matter how experienced the team, to have somebody on board, which can take 1 month to 3 months, maybe even longer, depending on how complex the team's portfolio is. That's something that is very difficult. One of the things that another company I worked for did was they got rid of a stage development teams that were focused on stage. So it may not be so, I don't know if it's so pertinent to the device world, certainly is pertinent to the gene therapy world or any normal clinical development world. In a medium-sized or large company, you will most likely have preclinical folks that have had preclinical, then you have that pre-IND stage, phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3, and sometimes that could be 2 or 3 different teams altogether that are by plan hand off. one company I worked for many years ago, this is already 15 years ago already. They deliberately implemented end to end. So unless somebody specifically transitioned off the team from the moment you went to from the moment it entered clinical pre-IND or IND enabling phase all the way to development, it was the same team. So and so I think that helped a lot, along with some of the other things I mentioned. It was actually a different company, but they also had similar non-explicit ways of choosing team members. But the only challenge was, of course, when people want to advance their careers, and let's say they don't, if they want to, especially in a medium-sized company, if you're associate director, and you're reporting up to a director or senior director on the same team, you're not going to move up unless that person retires or dies, unless you change team. So that's just a reality that we can't get around.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Eric, because I've had this on my teams as well. As oftentimes participating on project teams or core teams is actually a growth opportunity for folks as your organization grows and you start building out deeper levels of roles. It's often seen that maybe there'll be two representatives of a function because somebody is growing into that role, or this is an opportunity for them. And so, it becomes a little bit a pressure on the project team leads to then make sure that the team is still operating efficiently. You've got the right people in the room, but then, you're also trying to address these growth opportunities that folks have been trying to, may put in place without consulting you first. And then all of a sudden you've got a larger team than you're hoping for.
Yeah, thank you. And I have one of my clients who were quite bold, like they're from the medical devices, and they're bold enough to do a whole survey, which is more like a assessment, more at the personality and psychology, psychometric assessment. One of them was the insights, and then which gives all the different profiles. And they actually did it on all the sites, and so all at a global level, and they shared it with each other. And actually, I'm helping them with the PPM maturity, and now I'm also supporting them in going to the next level of maturity. And I think it was definitely very, very helpful to have those assessment and results shared with each other, but also used it. We used it for doing creating the composition of the teams, because we didn't want to have the same personality types in one team and have no other. So what we were trying to have is more cognitive diversity. So pure diversity doesn't help it. But just my friend Chaba in London would say, diversity just alone will not help. It's a liability, but diversity with inclusion, and especially with cognitive diversity, that's something where you can leverage the benefits. So great inputs. Let's move to the next question. How do you ensure simplification and standardization of program governance and decision-making architecture in your organization? Kyle, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go back to, I think that the best experience that I had with this was not my most recent company, but the one before that. And I think it's great as kind of as a case example. And we used I don't want to be an endorsement of any particular solution, but at the corporate level, there was a decision made that for governance-related decisions, those were really to be held at the highest levels of the business unit, and that was made as a distinction from project-level decisions that were reserved, and decision authority was left in the hands of the project manager, which was fantastic. It was a very nice distinction, and allowed for operational and execution to be done at the project level, but then strategy and placement prioritization within the portfolio to be at that upper level. And the tool that we implemented allowed for very good record keeping, and we had to put a lot of emphasis on the development of that tool, and then the training of it, and to make sure that it was really used consistently throughout the organization. It took some effort, as usually all of those types of efforts do. But because there was such an emphasis on this will be the way that we are doing things, then it became fairly quickly the way of working. And so it was very, very important. And I can't also overemphasize just how important it was to have very senior stakeholder, not just involvement and engagement, but endorsement to say this is the way that this will be handled. And so all of the kind of governance level information and decisions were captured within that system. And that was the tool that we used. And it allowed us to do that without being, without the project teams being overly constricted with how they had to execute each individual project. Because there were a variety of projects, they still had the flexibility to execute as they saw fit, as long as it stayed within the main governance framework.
Thank you, Stefan. If you wish to continue on that.
Yeah, I think it is. I think Kyle, what you described is great. I love the sort of mid-sized structures that you get to that point, and you can bifurcate sort of the high-level corporate strategy from program sort of strategy, and and it's a journey to get there. In a as we all know, in a startup environment, coming in with a lot of sort of standardization of governance right at the beginning is not always widely accepted by entrepreneurs, who feel, I've gotten this comment a few times too, where, hey, I don't want to be over bureaucratic, and they kind of jump immediately to that. And the story, you have to tell is it's not bureaucracy, it's structure, it's to create efficiencies. And I've learned how to spoon feed these kinds of standardizations and simplifications to be accepted by my leadership. Coming in and implementing a lot of things right away tends to turn people off and go against sort of this idea of like, no, we're all focused on this single program. This is the flagship program. So spoon feeding it is the approach that I've had, and taking it little by little and making sure that you're aware of the interpersonal dynamics of your leaders, understand, what would be accepted at what time, and slowly grow into that position. And I'm sort of in that transition phase right now with my company, in that, we've got fantastically wicked smart people all across the organization. And what we want to do is make project oversight and management easy for them, so that they can be a part of the team, contribute to it, and at the same time still do their day job, in order to execute upon the program. So again, sort of a little by little in a startup environment, I think has kind of been the way to go.
Great. Eric, if you would like to add your ideas to this.
Yeah, well, it's always nice to go last because I can just feed on Kyle and Steven's ideas. But so and that's exactly what I'll do, without shame. But starting a little bit with what both of you have said. So I think that understanding the dynamics of who you're working with is really key. I also know, for sure, for these small companies, you're not going to put in a whole PMO, because you won't last. But they're just not going to go for that, right? But I think, perhaps that's self-evident, but maybe not to all of us. Maybe we learned it, that people don't want it. But by the same token, even for a mid-sized large company, I think the amount of process and templates and stuff you use is largely dependent on what the decision makers want. Like anything, this, if it's not there and you want it to be there, and you want this change to be there, that you have to get the decision makers to sponsor this change and also make sure that it's communicated. And the best way I think, that's been taught to me was to get them to buy into this, to say, look, this is what will happen if you don't do it. If you don't support this, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get slides that are sometimes 10 slides that don't have anything that you want. And sometimes you get 100 slides that have everything that the clinical scientist ever read about this particular type of disease, right? So, if we can, create a guide, instead of calling it a template or whatever, that says, look, this is the story that you want to hear, this is the information you need, that's helpful, as a guide. And, I just had this discussion this morning with a project leader on something that's going to governance, and he said, I don't care about the guide. I'm like, okay, that's between you and governance. Then at the end of the day, I can only advise. The last thing I'll say, which is not necessarily building on what those guys have already said, but the other thing which I found is kind of a little bit sneaky, but you can do it. So you've done it many times, is let's say, you're starting a new team and or you're starting a project and you want to charter the project, or you want to charter the team. So, if you flash up a project charter or a team charter in front of this Word document template, their eyes are going to completely glass over and you're not going to get any attention at all. But, if you lead them through it, like it's a discussion, and you just say, like, here's a slide, like, okay, what, do we all agree this is the vision of the company? Do we all, and then go to the slide, okay, so what do we think are the major gaps? Okay, so what do we think is the major problem? What should we be working on? And you just take it slide by slide, then offline, you fill it out and go, hey, guess what? You made a project charter, you didn't even know it. And then, our team charter, whatever the case may be. And that seems to work, just don't tell people what you're doing, just do it. And then you can fill in the template later and just say, look, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, I guess that is what we talked about. So.
Absolutely. And love this idea of not telling the people what they're doing, and like, just make them like do something like almost like I have some colleagues who gamify part of the project, like, and people were not even knowing that what they were doing. And we also had a presentation from Janssen, so Johnson and Johnson, the Swiss team at the last BPM summit in Basel, where they showed how they are doing the quality control and quality assurance trainings, and they have completely gamified it. And it's with virtual reality, and it's like some interplanetary game. And actually, you are like trying to discover all the parts and different details of the quality assurance trainings. And like, I think like, yeah, you can completely change how you are doing. I think what is key is like bringing the stories from the people. What stories are people saying? And behind the data, like Brené Brown puts it very well, stories are data with a soul. So let me move to the next question. In your daily operations, decision making and governance, how do you separate functional excellence from project leadership in stakeholder management? Kyle, if you would like to start this time.
Yeah, sure. And the way I approached this question was very similar to how I mentioned before, that I think it's incredibly important to leave project level decisions right within the project, and that's really been one of the difficulties. And let me just frame it a little bit of how this governance goes. And then typically the project team moves along, and when it comes time for a stage gate, that's when a review team that is typically comprised of folks not on the team, but usually the functional managers, right? So somewhat objective, but familiar enough with the project, will come in and evaluate how things are going. And that's part of the stakeholder management that has to happen, is how engaged do we keep that governance team who needs to essentially give the blessing that we're okay to move from one phase to the next, without giving them so much information that they then want to become involved and start, not that it's micromanaging, but becoming too involved on a day-to-day basis with the project. And it's a dance, right? It's a dance that has to be managed really, really well by the project manager, which requires quite a bit of savviness, but also coaching each of the team members of, hey, how much do you feed to your supervisor, right, who will end up being on that governance review team? And it has to be tailored to each of those individuals. Some of those people don't really care to be involved on a day-to-day basis, and some of them care too much, right? And so it is quite a bit of a dance, but as much as we can, we try to coach our project managers and the team members that, look, you want the autonomy to be able to make projects or to make decisions within each of your phases. So do yourself a favor, right? And create a local micro environment that allows you to do that, but also in such a way that you're not going to get to a phase or stage gate and then find that all of your work has been for naught, right? So there is a balance that has to be in there. And it's the art of this side of both all along, from project, program, portfolio management. And it's something that kind of constantly has to be reinforced because it's not something you just learn once and you say, okay, I'm good, right? I'm good now and forevermore. Every team is different. Every review team is different. So you constantly have to be on your toes.
Absolutely. And I love the way you put it. Eric, if you would like to add your ideas to this.
Yeah, I'll keep it short since we're at the end. But I think the simple way I tried representing their functions at the team and representing the team at the functions, and to try to keep those decisions that belong on the team at the team, and the decisions that belong at the functions and above at the functions. Doesn't always work, but when it falls apart and that stakeholder management falls apart, as Kyle was alluding to, then we can go back to our agreement and say, this is what we expected, so let's not let this happen again.
Yeah, that sounds great. And Eric, I agree. And I think for me to just kind of separating out functional excellence and project leadership, I sort of see that project leadership is the connective tissue with all of these different functions. And sometimes you can have functions executing in an excellent manner, making the right decisions necessary for making sure they're completing their aspects of the program. But what happens is then the follow-on effect of another function, and not seeing the impact that those decisions have on the other functions. And that's where I think you can demonstrate project leadership is not necessarily questioning the technical or the functional excellence, but saying, what is the bigger picture and what is the impact on it? And how do you respond to change? How do you get the team to focus on something beyond their particular function and be able to speak to a broader program strategy? And so that's how I see the difference in how a stakeholder can perceive the two.
Great. Thank you. We are running out of time, so I'll just have one last quick question. Does your PMO function have a detailed service catalog or detailed PMO service catalog?
I'll answer very quickly to say that no, in my experience, the PMO hasn't had quite that much authority, and so it's a loose function. But in my organizations, we've been much more functionally driven, and so while the PMO is there to provide a service, it's never been quite so mature as to have a full catalog.
Yep, I agree with Kyle. That's been my career experience too.
Eric?
And yeah, I would just say it depends on where I've been. Some places it's more complete than others. And I think I alluded to this early, sometimes people just ignore it anyway. So
Great. So thanks for all these insights. I really like this idea of understanding dynamics of all people you're dealing with, having this dance by the PM. I like this idea. Standing up for more efficiency through standardization and not bureaucracy. So I also like this idea, and really having the endorsement of very senior stakeholders. So absolutely, we need to keep this conversation ongoing. So for the audience, if you have more questions for the speakers in the panel, feel free to write in the chat, and we still have one more day to go. So I'll be back. I'll be in the backstage now for a minute, and I'll be back with the next keynote presentation. So please stay tuned.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.